All right, we're going.
Okay. So we can start with the Black Power. I think it's important to talk about that the Black Panthers were like a political party during the civil rights movement in America. I personally think they would certainly be classified as secular, like a secular millenarian group. They wanted to like the party wanted to achieve change from how people of color were being treated in America. However, their ideals were extremely radical in theory and in practice. The leaders as well as the followers were willing to put their lives on hold indefinitely to obtain the freedom that they had. They wanted to just let go of themselves, like from systematic oppression, and just release the shackles from even just the years and years of slavery that their descendants even have been had like experienced. Um,
With what you were saying about Black Panthers being like radical, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're radical. I definitely agree, like carrying weapons around. But like if you read the platform, it said like there are rules: do not shoot first, do not shoot anyone. If you do damage a house, like go repay it. So there were rules and different guidelines that they had to follow with that. And another thing I want to point out is like they chose the panther to be their logo because the nature of the panther doesn't strike anyone first. They first take a step back, and then if the oppressor keeps pushing forward, then they'll attack. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And well, I do agree that they are secular millenarians. Their evil that they sort of talked about, like they said that America was covering it up, thinking that it was racism, but the real evil was actually capitalism, because that was keeping the Black Panthers or just the Black community away from equal housing or equal jobs. In the last YouTube video, it was Carmichael was interviewing, I believe it was his wife, and he's like, why doesn't your husband have a job? And she's like, because he's Black. And when they were laying off people, they laid off the Black people first. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting to compare that to like it was like the opening scene of that with the diner owner who said anyone can make a living in America as long as you're not lazy and have a little bit of ambition. So I think that's important to recognize the like different privileges at the time, and same with capitalism. Like at the time, it's a system that favors the people that are privileged. So like white people at this time compared to like Black people had to really build up from the inequalities that they were dealing with. And it's like the focus on more things related to equity, I think, with capitalism. And then also with like some of the laws, like right to bear arms, equality.
Yeah, I think it's super important to also talk about like the party went like as far as to demand that the bad of the good, like the Blacks in prison, be released due to like whites' injustice. Like I think that this would define like the utopian society that they wanted to chase. Like they have a clear distinction between like the good and bad people of the society, with like the good being the oppressed colored and the bad being the privileged white. Like it's kind of just, there's a clear distinction of what they think is good and bad, and you can see it even with the diner comment, like lazy or no ambition. That's kind of just, you kind of just get a sense of like what they're talking about or who they're talking about when they say that stuff.
Yeah, and it
Even if
was
it,
you go.
I was just gonna add, like, even if it's like ignorance that they're saying this, it's inaccurate. So that's important to consider too, but that's the perspective that they have at the time.
Right. And with going off of perspective, so the second YouTube video was done by Swedish filmmakers, so that it showed basically their perspective on it from seeing it from a different world. And actually at the end of the video at 42:34, it says the US said that Sweden is portraying them to be evil and everything. So I thought that was pretty interesting because obviously a white American might not see like what's going on, like their perspective is, oh, like equal rights or whatever, like it is equal. Meanwhile, it really isn't if you watch it from the Sweden's perspective.
Yeah. I think something that is like important to talk about too is like, is it right to bear arms? Like, who's gonna bear arms? Should there be reparations in like monetary value? Like, I just kind of wanted to ask you guys what you thought about that.
I
Like, do you
think
think that everyone should get the right to bear arms?
I think regardless of like at the time, if I think consistency is the most important thing. So if you're gonna have the right to bear arms, then everyone should be able to do that, you know, consistency across the board. But if you're not, then people shouldn't. And there's some complications with like people's beliefs with gun rights and stuff. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about these circumstances, it's important to just have consistency within the population to be able to have clear guidelines and expectations, especially with laws throughout the country.
Yeah.
So are you talking about like right to bear arms now or then?
Just like, I mean, anytime. I just wanted to hear what you guys had to say before I said what I said.
So like
Before
right now, I think right to bear arms, just sure, like you can do it, but there needs to be really strict guidelines with it. Like not everyone can just go and purchase a gun, like go to the store and be like, hey, I want an AR-15. I just don't think that's right.
Yeah.
Just especially because there are no background checks. Like someone could have a criminal record and he could purchase a gun and then go shoot someone right away. Like I live in Texas now and they are some crazy drivers there and you've pissed them off. Like I guarantee they have a pistol or something in their glove compartment and they can come up to you and shoot you, which is pretty freaking scary. Like one time I was in Houston, I was literally in a Smoothie King and I thought this guy was a cop or whatever, but nah, he was just a plain old guy and he was carrying like a magnum with him. So I was like, this is kind of crazy to see that.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there just needs to be a lot of restrictions and make sure that everyone goes through that same process. Like Anna was saying, consistency.
Yeah. I mean, what I wanted to add was just like, I think in the time being, the Black Panthers needed to have the guns. So police, like, okay, they didn't shoot anyone if they weren't shot at first. So they had these guns to protect their people because the police were killing them without any consequence. But nowadays, I think the right to bear arms can't just be extended to every person, like what Ben and what you, Anna, were saying. Like it should be strict and unbiased regulations because we see a lot of people, or in America, we see that a lot of white Americans are able to hold guns and they're not questioned. Like that guy in Smoothie King wasn't even questioned that he had a gun. But let's say a Black man comes in with a gun, automatically there's accusations. And this has to go back to, you know, the legacy of slavery, the legacy of injustice, the legacy of, you know, colored Americans having to feel like they are different. I'm Puerto Rican, so I can kind of pass as white because I sound white, but I know from it's like when people know who I am or what I am, they automatically have judgment. So I think to stop all of this from happening, there just needs to be like a fair like situation for everybody, even if the situation was unfair to other people, because white Americans will feel oppressed if everyone gets the right equality or the same equality as they do, because not everyone should think the same way they do, if that makes sense. I don't know how to explain it other than that, but I don't know. I just kind of went off on a ramble.
Yeah, I think like the regulation is really important. And at this time, like the criteria for the regulation was not like the principles that we need or like abide by with equality in the country, like ideally. So you shouldn't, yeah, it should be based off of like, I don't know, experience, well, like stability, experience and stuff like that, rather than your race, clearly. But
Yeah.
at the
Yeah,
same,
race, religion, all of that stuff.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, just one more thing. Like you mentioned Utopia a while ago in a few statements. And I think like this with the factions, like this clearly has factions with it, like, the division of people. And yeah, the Black Panthers were looking to kind of create a more equal society and kind of mend that to have a utopia or more of a utopia, because right now it's not fitting the criteria or definition at all. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any more thoughts?
Um, well, you said they were, well, no. In the interview with one of the Black Panthers, he said, "Do not riot, peaceful protest." Like that was one thing that kind of showed out or like stood out to me a little bit.
Mhm.
Like people think, like you were saying, like the Black Panther were radical. They just carried those guns around for intimidation. I just watched the videos. I'm not really sure if they did shoot people. I'm sure they did, but it wasn't really shown in the video. Um, but like they also were performing these different tasks, like they made up these different programs, but no one ever talks about those programs because they just think that they're carrying around the gun, so they're like gonna shoot you or whatever. But they actually made different programs, and the one that stood out to me the most and the one that was talked about the most was the um, breakfast program for colored people before school. So yeah.
yeah, I think that is
Yeah.
important to notice, because I've learned about this through all my history classes, and that was the first time that it was really brought up, their like contribution to the community, aside from the obvious, the stuff that was publicized. And it's kind of more backgrounds, like contributing, especially to the youth, which is really important, incorporating that in.
Yeah, I think also like the programs kind of show that, like what Ben said, like they weren't just carrying guns to do bad. Like I think that they just looked radical because they are intimidating. They are carrying these big guns. It's kind of like to scare. Like I don't
Right.
know. I don't know
That
how
I
to
mean,
explain it. Like
that's what one white officer did talk about in the YouTube video.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I think that like when it comes to like just talking about like the programs, I think it kind of goes with the concept of like a reparation, like reparation for like Black Americans, like because that was kind of something that was in the question, like to make up for the time that they were held back because of slavery or just economically or socioeconomically. Um, I think that like there should be some type of help to help the communities, but not to give money because I feel like giving money to just anybody will maybe be wasted. I think that equality economically should be given to everybody. And I think that this might seem unfair to the people that aren't getting payment, but in fact, like Black people were behind because of slavery and that being part of history. So if anything, it would kind of just be making like an unfair situation fair because they're getting the money and the like materials and the tools for life that we all get because our skin is not brown or like it just like it would make sense to put that money towards those areas that don't have that money.
Yeah, it would be like getting justice, getting to the root of the problem, kind of focusing on the equity
Hmm.
part of it rather than just equality, which is kind of more of
Yeah.
a surface level
Yeah.
thing, which is why there hadn't been significant progress made at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we spent a little bit too much time on this one, but that's okay. Um, so let's switch to Utopia. What are everyone's thoughts on that?
I think it was an interesting transition for society at this time in building the communities all around. I think Woodstock was depicted in the YouTube video that we saw, which was I don't know. It was interesting to like see that. And then after reflecting on the written text by Daly, it was cool to see like without, it was a community without rules, all-nighters, sleepovers, 10-day marriages. And it was interesting to see how these societies, like the result of them, and they all seem to like really work, and then they did it all at once, and it was kind of like reality set in, from outside circumstances, that weren't considered in the initial process of the ideal lifestyles of these people.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. Like with the song, I'm looking at the lyrics right now, but it's like, I'm gonna leave this city, go get away. And he's like, I'm going wherever the water tastes like wine. Like, it was based off of Woodstock, and Woodstock was kind of crazy from what I've heard. And yeah, like it sort of just started out of nowhere. Like they said a commune was natural outgrowth of a camp and dorms without rules. Um, and it was full of different parties. So there were like anarchists and pacifists. Some of the anarchists was there, and then the pacifists were there just because they wanted to see what everyone else was doing. And it was kind of weird to like read that animals worked and partners in fields, and like the animals actually helped feed the community. I'm not really sure what they meant by that, because um, there were some communities that like had no meat or animal products, like not even leather was permitted for even clothing. So I'm not really sure how that entirely works. But it was interesting also to see that there was some structure to the society, although it ended up like crashing and burning. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the text, it just talks about like the movement, like being from urban to rural, and like them wanting to like living in a concert was like appealing, like just like living free and like leaving the cities and just being able to be themselves. And I think they had the right concept. I think that they wanted to just live this free life, but they forget that as humans, we kind of have things we need, and there's
Responsibility.
structures that, yeah, there's structures that need to be had. Like, you can't just live in a community and everybody do whatever they want whenever they want it, or it'll fail. And it did. Like, literally says like the communal experiment eventually failed because there's a lot of things like Ben was saying, there's no meat. So how are humans gonna survive? I mean, we can live off of plants, but I mean, people do, vegetarians, but you still need protein.
The
Yeah,
psychedelic
I
it's
learned
plants too.
it's interesting because it said, like in the text, it said it was a way to extend childhood to adulthood. And I think as humans, like we're too complex to have such, I don't know, I feel like you need more, like as we get older, as we mature, as we have different experiences, you kind of need more from life than just like the surface level, like
Mhm,
fun. Like it's important
mhm.
to have structure, it's important to have responsibilities, and that's what gives people purpose ultimately when they're at like, I don't know, like a
I
lower
think too,
state.
yeah, I think too, like what you were saying, like surface level, I think they were like, they wanted to experience something where they could connect to people's souls.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
it was like a community of like artists, writers, photographers, like people who like of heart and mind, like those people that are just so creative that, they might feel restricted and big, while they work like 9 to 5 jobs, or, like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Like they might not feel like they like thrive. But it's like, I think something important to bring up is like he just said, like life is a learning process. You learn hard lessons and you learn easy lessons, and some you never forget, which I think is kind of goes in hand with the theme of like youth, like the youth opia, I can't even say it.
Utopia.
Yeah, I can't stop. I don't know, I think that it's something that they learned about. The experience is never going to go away, but I just don't think that something like that would thrive in anywhere, even if they tried again.
Yeah, ultimately it just kind of limits people because they aren't able to figure out their experiences and live in other areas to develop who they are. And I think once you have something so good, that became their reality, and then they didn't really want that anymore. It's kind of hard
Yeah.
to, I mean, it's great, it's great, it's great, and then it's not great, and then they're
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah.
And it's like those places can get a little isolating, like isolating.
Yeah, and
And
it can be intense too.
yeah, especially when there's so many other places to go. I mean, Woodstock, I actually just went to Woodstock, and so it was cool to see like how that
Wait,
reflects.
Woodstock's still around?
It's a town.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was a festival.
There's a festival
It
in the
is.
town. Like
It's
actually
Woodstock.
near the town. It was cool to see
Yeah.
how that like that era kind of reflects the town now. But I couldn't imagine just being like, I mean, it's a beautiful place, but like just being confined to that forever.
Yeah.
I think that wasn't going to be something that would be good for anyone. That wasn't something ideal for anyone. But at the time, the circumstances were great, and it was something different, something new. And then it became not different or new. So it's hard
Yeah.
to sustain
Humans
Yeah.
that.
humans get bored.
Yeah.
I think humans get bored.
That's why like people keep coming up with new ideas and stuff. They get bored. Like Jeff Bezos, Amazon billionaire, whatever. He's like, I want to go to space. So he just goes and does it. Like what? Doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. He's just bored. He's that wealthy that, he's like, why not?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Um, next topic. Millenarian democracy.
All righty. So I think that it's important to talk about how politicians have always and were criticized for like corruption. In like Carter's address, he was criticized for not being a leader, but rather managing the government, like being the government's manager. There are many people who don't feel connected to the government. Um, Another important point is just like talking about like all of the critiques aren't the same, but they're questioning like a lot of the faults of the government that are inefficient or ineffective. Like also talks about like inflation, kind of like a buzzword. Like the US oil dependency on the Middle East was a similarity between like kind of both videos, and like oil spikes cause a lot of shifting between inflation and deflation in the US economy. um yeah, corruption and inflation were kind of just like a big thing in this whole module.
Yeah, I think he was trying to give information while kind of motivating Americans. And he kind of said, like, people kind of give too much, not credit, like substance to the government when the nation is like about the people and it's about all the individuals and the faith that they have in being able to hold the government kind of accountable, and having faith in democracy in the future, and just the possibilities that some of the circumstances are temporary, even though they don't feel temporary. And there's other options to kind of look towards, and circumstances in the future that look different than the present life.
Yeah, I just think that, like you said, like a lot of people much rather would blame the president or whoever, and we, United States is we the people. It's all of us. It's prices go high because less oil was coming in, or still, I mean, gas prices are through the roof. And many can't really afford it, on top of being unemployed and not having a good source of income. But the government's supposed to aid in all of this, and also be in debt, and also make its citizens happy. And just, I don't know, like I think something important too is like, just like the big shots aren't the only ones who are important. Like it's also everybody. I think in the government, or just in the United States, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Like if half of our population is just not doing well, then we're not all doing well because we're not thriving as a nation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Right. Yes. I finally get to speak through this one. Let's go.
That-
Yeah, so Andrea, with what you were talking about, like how everyone's like blaming the president or whatever, that's literally what everyone does, even if it isn't the president, like if it's a smaller thing, like,
Yeah.
oh, like screw this guy, like he gave me a bad grade. I actually screw my finance teacher. That guy gave me 6 points off, even though that I did one thing wrong. Like he gave me 6 points off. I was pretty pissed off about that because the other two parts of it were correct. So I was pretty upset about that. But like it's sort of normal to complain and also blame other people in our society today, which is interesting to see because there's not enough accountability around. Um, just like with every like political party that's involved, like the Democrats are elected into office and they undo everything that the Republicans did, and then vice versa. When the Republicans are in, they'll undo everything the Democrats did. And then everyone just keeps blaming the old president or the new one. It's just like
Yeah.
a endless cycle that just never stops.
I mean, they
Yeah,
talk about every single president, like every single president's at fault every time. So
Yeah. Like
What were you
Abraham
gonna say,
Lincoln,
Anna?
that guy.
Not honest
Yeah.
Abe. Not honest Abe. What were you gonna say, Anna?
yeah, I was just gonna say accountability is really important as individuals. And I mean, we have such a privilege to be able to be so involved in our government compared to other countries, and it's important to educate ourselves to figure out what's the best option. And then there's also a responsibility on our government to, I mean, rather than just like go with the ideals that people have, actually consider the nation for the individuals that they are and see what would be best for the function and future
Yeah.
of the nation at the time. And it's important to consider time in these situations because, I mean, if you force laws, if you force things that people aren't ready for, people aren't going to be able to adapt, and it's not going to be productive for society.
No, 100%. I also think that it's about all of us being on the same page too, like you said, like the government being on the same page and its citizens too. Like, don't just say that this is happening or be like, I don't know what's happening, and you do. Like, I feel like we're not told a lot of things. We're told what we need to know,
Right.
or like on a need to know basis. Like, but then you see, news from other countries talking about the United States, and you're like, huh? What? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
they sort of tell us what we kind of want to hear, right? In that way. And that's also, I think, partially has to do with how we hear about it. Starts with the news. Like obviously there are different news people like Fox News, ABC News, CNN News. Some are biased, some are not biased. Some are partial, some are impartial. So like it all depends where you get your sources as well as to whether things are good or not.
Totally. Media really, it's the link of communication for all of us. And so it's important to make sure that we're holding those people accountable too with everything.
Yeah. Just
Move on to
yeah, let's move on.
the time.
We have 10 minutes left
Hey.
on the Zoom. So
So it's full circle. It was interesting watching the Witness to Waco video and seeing how religion, because with Utopia, it was more like ideals of people like and beliefs that weren't as like influenced by religion, but this was heavily influenced by religion. It was interesting to see how that gave people purpose and how people got involved with that whole little like cult commune situation.
Yeah. I think like what you said, I think it's super important, and like the part where like I think government should absolutely step in when a religious group is doing something that violates the law. Like I am fully aware that freedom of religion is included in our constitution and has been for hundreds and hundreds of years, but there's several freedoms that can be limited given the circumstances. Like legally speaking, prisoners lose several rights once they're in prison. Just because a group is acting due to religion, that does not excuse them to do whatever they want whenever they want to. I think that's super important to talk about. Like government does, like, can just kind of like stop people just from doing, like, you can't just kill someone and say, well, God told me so. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the child brides, it's like the religion was projected onto them. Like they don't know anything but that to choose the religion. And it wasn't even a choice for the young
Yeah.
women in that.
Yeah.
So
Like what
that
you
wasn't
don't
even like a religion thing. It was just like
yeah.
pedophilia.
Yeah, and to bring that to like well, I guess the Muslim religion or the Indian culture, how they have arranged marriage, like a woman and a man like will probably never meet each other, and then it's like, hey, you're marrying this guy, deal with it, like whatever. It's actually like in what was it? I think in A Thousand Splendid Suns, this girl was just like in a prearranged marriage, and the husband was super abusive. So it was like kind of interesting to be like, dude, like this isn't it, you know? Like people should
Mhm.
have the freedom to choose like what they should do, but the childbirth was or child wives was kind of weird. I didn't like that.
Yeah. I think that that's like even in the United States, we have people who are in the Muslim community or Indian and go off to other countries and get married and come back. And I think that that's like kind of the most religious, like ridiculous and dangerous loophole ever with religion. Like religious freedoms is one of the best things that America has to offer. I can be Christian, non-denominational, Anna, you could be Catholic, and Ben, you could be whatever you want. But that religious freedom cannot and like should not infringe on people's safety. Like seeing a 40-year-old man with like a 17-year-old girl because they got married in another country and came back or something like that, like it's up to the government to kind of do its job and like protect American people from things that can cause them harm. Like all things have a limit, and religious freedom kind of has to be included in that. I just
Yeah.
think that's super important to talk about.
Yeah, it infringes on other freedoms and the well-being of the individuals that are also equally important values that we have in the United States.
Yeah.
And Andrea, like how you were saying, like all things need a limit, just to bring it back to right to bear arms, sort of like that, right? That's what you're talking about. Like all things really do need a limit, even with Woodstock and Utopia. Like you kind of want to make sure that there's a limit to that too, in a sense, just because there needs to be some sort of set structural guidelines of like to have responsibilities. So yeah.
Yeah, like the no rules kind of like values in that, like boundaries and rules are important to like the well-being of individuals. It's important to have those to be able to navigate life, to see what you want to do. Like there's children being raised in like this cult that don't know anything else but that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting
Yeah.
to see their perspectives, and then also like as a result of like having it ended, like seeing how they face their new reality outside of it.
Yeah, like facing the real world. They're being brought up in this kind of like utopian society where everything's perfect, there's no rules. And then when they reach regular society where everybody, there's rules, regulations, and things you must do, and things that are socially acceptable and things that aren't, they're kind of in a shock.
And they also reflect on like, oh, this wasn't ideal to have share
Yeah.
a husband that I don't want with other people too.
Yeah, maybe let's not do that.
So
And it's
that's
interesting too, like after all is said and done with the Woodstock thing, like when they look back on it, like what do you think the reaction is? Like, wow, that was really stupid of us, or like, wow, it was worth it because we like kind of learned from that. Like, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's like you look back and I mean, there's times in everyone's life you look back and you're like, that was an experience. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I learned, but I don't think I'd go back to that, but I'm glad I did it. It could be something like
Yeah,
that. Or like
I
they could romanticize like that part of their life, but understand that it wasn't like the most fulfilling life that they could have.
Right.
yeah, I imagine them to be like, oh yeah, there's never a time where I felt more free in my life other than that. But everyone kind of craves structure, I think, in a way or another.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, does anyone have any other final thoughts on anything?
Oh, I do.
All right, we got 3 minutes.
um, okay, I'm gonna rush. Gladwell, I wanted to say that I think it's important that close to the end, Gladwell brings up how America finds it far easier to be tolerant when the outsider chooses to minimize the difference between themselves and society, which has to do with like Woodstock and just all these religious like freedoms and all that stuff. Like I think it's America tolerates the difference, but we're like they don't want to accept it all. Like if it's out of sight, out of mind, like we won't like it's fine. I just don't do nothing weird about me, I guess, type of thing. Which
Right.
I think
Like
is
if it isn't bothering you, like leave it be. Is that what you're trying to say?
yeah, it has nothing to do with me. I'm not gonna pay it any mind.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.